I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're about to hear a chapter of my ongoing sword and sorcery serial. I wrote it to be heard, not read, and there's no music, sound effects, or character actors. It's all me, and I do it in one single, flawless take. We pick up exactly where we left off last time. So if this is your first experience with SKALD and you want to hear the story from the beginning, you might want to hop back to some of the previous episodes before moving ahead. It's up to you, though. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 25. Enleth watched. She was disgusted, sickened, repulsed. But still, she watched. She sat in front of the gnomish devices as they cast their images up on sheets of silk. And she watched. Watched with her pale hand pressed to her even paler face. Watched silently, alone in that darkened room, her stomach tormented by nausea. The dainty pastry soaked in honey, the cool sweet wine in the ornate silver goblet, they all laid untouched as Enleth sat and she watched. Though she had been in battles too numerous to count, had led from the front, cutting down the vanguard of countless failed revolutions, though she had not only been confronted with the horrors of war, but had committed them willingly. Still, she was appalled by what she saw, what she had commanded unleashed upon that ill-prepared border realm, by what was done in her name under those twin suns. She watched from the beginning, from the moment the war priests turned on the gnomish devices, recording and transmitting every foul, shambling motion of that terrible, unspeakable monster, every groan and roar that came from its foul, misshapen lips. Enleth gasped when that thing, the Feldron, first arrived in the nameless city. She had seen it in action before, but never fully unleashed, left to run roughshod over all that lay before it. She watched as the beast released its uncontrollable loathing, starting with the very alley where she and her warriors had confronted the assassin, Maul. It wasn't long before the Feldron took its first life in that border realm. It wasn't done in the controlled, almost regretful way Enleth had seen it destroy the insubordinate gnomes. No, when the Feldron was unleashed, when it was let loose, its methods became exponentially more terrible, more profane. When the Feldron lashed out with its uninhibited loathing, Enleth couldn't stand the sight of it. But still, she watched as the loathing contained by the Feldron, the loathing her war priests had encouraged and cultivated, consumed all those present. Save for the war priests themselves, hidden behind their carefully casted and maintained wards. She ignored the knocks on the door, and she watched. She sent away the courtiers bold enough to enter without her permission. And she watched. Her stomach growled from a combination of nausea and hunger, but still she watched, the abomination projected on those smooth silk sheets, holding her rapt attention. The nameless city was filthy. A blight on creation, a festering boil, civilization gone wrong, then multiplied like the malignant tumor it was. Its people were cruel, base, and content to wallow in their own filth, never hoping for more. But still, they didn't deserve the end Enleth had condemned them to. They didn't deserve the Feldron. No one did. No one save for the assassin, Maul. She watched as the city collapsed around what passed for the Feldron's ears, watched as it stampeded out of those smoldering ruins, out of a barren field of death and decay, one that would remain fallow for millennia as empires rose, fell, and rose again around it. She watched as the monster tore its way into the arbor, the secret, protected home of the Farah, her sworn enemies, the home that she and her ancestors had endeavored to conquer and destroy for as long as it had existed. But though she had no love for the Farah, though she would have struck down every man, woman, and child within that rebellious enclave if given the chance, watching them suffer the gaze of the Feldron was more than she wanted to bear. But though it pained her, she did bear it. She suffered through, her gaze glued to the heinous ruination that she had willingly authorized. Though it infuriated her to see the Feldron turned away, especially by something as unimposing, as unimpressive as that small, mousy little human girl. There was a significant part of Enleth that was relieved, delighted that she no longer had to watch the wholesale slaughter of a people who were far closer to her and her subjects than she would ever dare admit. Besides, the Farah were a problem for another day. She would venture to the arbor with an army, and she would raze it to the ground in the right way. But the revolting ruination brought on by the Feldron, that was for Maul and Maul alone. She watched as the Feldron tore its way into the frozen north, miles and miles beyond the hidden arbor, so far north that it was not only devoid of people, but of any life at all. She watched the Feldron stomp through the snowbanks, feeling neither exhaustion nor cold, and though it lasted only a second, a brief moment before the Feldron turned and doubled back, following Maul's trail, Enleth saw something that froze her as cold as those barren, wintry forests. She saw the beast, the one that Maul had slaughtered, its carcass perfectly preserved, frozen and motionless in the icy stillness that had been its domain. Enleth had never seen one in real life, had never even seen a drawing that wasn't drenched in exaggeration and hyperbole. But she was still able to spot one of the old kind, even in as desecrated a state as that poor, mangled horse. But what truly terrified her, what caused her hot, vengeful blood to turn to ice, it was what the animal was missing. Its horn, that long, twisting, alabaster horn. Maul had taken it. Maul had taken the horn. He had no idea what it was, what it truly was, what it was capable of. How could he? He couldn't. He couldn't know, but still, he had taken it. And if nothing else, Maul had proven that he was as resourceful as he was resilient. This new knowledge of the unspeakable weapon that Maul now possessed, it filled Enleth with dread. But also, it vindicated her. This was why she had unleashed the Feldron. This was why 1,000 lives must come to an end, and 1,000 more if necessary. Maul had begun his march through the sundered worlds, had torn through them in a way that exceeded even the most dire prophecies, had wrought destruction and terror, had shattered plans that had been in place for generations, and if he wasn't stopped, this was merely the beginning. If he made it back to his home realm, the realm of man, and he did it with that horn clutched in his clumsy fist. Enleth shuddered at the thought. In unleashing the Feldron and merely authorizing its creation, Enleth had committed a harrowing, irredeemable sin, one that she would no doubt pay for 10 times over, in this world, in the next, or perhaps in both. Though she was shocked by the scale, the horror of what she unleashed did not surprise her. She had commanded her war priests. She had ordered them to choke down their fears, to summon up the debauched components that comprised the Feldron, to imbue it with a profane life that spat in the face of honest, natural creation, and she had sent it, uninhibited, unrestrained, into that border realm, condemning an entire world to a death as terrible as it was sudden, and she had done it. Willingly and knowingly. She had done it because she must, because this was the true measure of a leader. This was where a ruler's mettle was tested. This was her crucible to endure and come out victorious with her noble head held high. She had made a terrible decision. Yes, an awful, soul-searing, unforgivable choice. But she had done it to prevent something far, far worse. But while that terrible decision could be explained, it could not be mitigated, could not be forgiven. It could never be forgotten, which is why she chose to look the horror of her choices, the terror of her decrees, to look the destruction of the Feldron right in its foul, unnerving, glassy eyes. To make a difficult choice, an impossible choice, in the interest of a higher good, to stand by the decision and all it entails, that was the heart of leadership. Enleth sighed heavily as the recording came to an end. She had caught up to the Feldron's current position, whatever current meant when dealing with the shifting nature of time between the sundered worlds. She pressed the bases of her palms and her eyes clenched shut with exhaustion, the pressure causing colors to burst behind her heavy eyelids. After a brief moment, her eyes shot open, she set her jaw, and she turned the gnomish device back to the beginning. She would watch it. She would watch it again and again. She would willingly confront the horrible consequences of her actions, and she would not look away. Maul, drunk, happy, and hungry, flopped back into his oversized throne, the granite monstrosity that was far too big for him. A pair of industrious halflings scrambled away with their measurements, off to fashion their god-king a set of new leathers. Crude and rough, but sturdy clothing to replace the supple elk leather that still hung from Maul in tatters, crusted over with blood, then burnt and blackened from Maul's encounter with the stone god. Maul raised his chin, roaring. "Food! Drink! Now! Your god hungers!" But before he could lower his head, the two halfling girls, his nighttime companions, were there by his elbows. Suana, pretty, serious, boasting eyes that shone with intelligence, held a platter of dried meats cheeses, and what few berries could still be foraged from the immediate forest. And on the other side, Belbrix, bruises on her neck, staring lustily at her god king as she offered up another bowl of that sweet, harsh, clear, unaged liquor. Suana spoke forcefully enough to get Maul's attention, but softly enough so as not to embarrass her king in front of the halfling attendants that filled the longhouse during the day. My king, you'll see that we're running low on berries, fruits of all kinds. She nodded downward toward her platter. Your hungers, Skog's hungers, the feast celebrating your reign. They've depleted our stores, the slaughterhouses are empty, and at this rate, our dried reserves will soon be the same. Maul sighed and rolled his eyes, but before he could respond, Belbrix hopped up onto his lap, raising her bowl to his lips. Hush, Suana. Our god asked for sustenance, not for complaints. Maul laughed as he drank from the bowl, then choked and laughed again, allowing the harsh liquor to drip down his chin, weaving its way through the thick stubble that had been spreading across his face. That's right. Maul turned to the halflings who tended the longhouse's fires. What's the point of being a king, of being a god, if you must trouble yourself with the same worries as a peasant? Not knowing the correct answer, the halflings simply nodded in happy agreement before turning back to their fires. Suana took a deep breath, knowing that the path she embarked upon was treacherous and that it would require sure footing and no small amount of agility. I know not, my king, and I know not what guides the movements of the wild beasts of the forest, but I do know that if we don't make preparations to find them, preparations for the hunt, then your feasts won't be fit for a warrior, much less a king, much less a god. Maul filled his hand from the platter, then shoved the food into his mouth, carelessly spilling meat, cheese, and berries upon the ground. He spilled enough food to make a meal for 2 hardy halfling warriors, but when 4 halfling attendants fell to the ground, fighting over the crumbs, it went unnoticed by their god king. Maybe you're right. This is a pitiful meal. I may as well be eating Skog's birds. He took the platter from Suana and flung it to the massive cat beast who laid sprawled out next to one of the roaring fires. Suana winced, turning her gaze away from the ravenous halflings who watched in horror as Skog casually sated herself on a veritable feast. Then I take it we're in agreement? Suana spoke softly, but quickly. You'll meet with them? You'll meet with the hunters? Maul turned to Belbrix and held out his bowl. Be a good girl now. More drink. Quickly. Belbrix smiled sweetly and danced off with the bowl as Maul turned back to Suana, sighing. What is it that you want me to do? You are our king and our god. The hunters, they need to consult with you before the hunt. You need to tell them. Maul stopped her. Why don't you tell me? Why can't you do it? Suana was shocked. Me? But I can't take your place. You sit upon the granite throne. You are the Avatar. You have to meet with them, and you have to do it soon. Maul reached out and took the now full bowl that Belbrix presented to him, waving Suana away with his other hand. Just go. Handle it. Tell them what they need to know. Belbrix giggled as she climbed back up into Maul's lap. Tell them whatever will make them go away, Suana. Maul laughed in response. Yes, or even better, tell them nothing at all. Let them pray and wait in silence. Why should I respond at all? Why should I be different from any other god? He turned to Suana and grinned. It appears you might be forgetting your place, Suana. The savage brute grabbed the halfling girl abruptly, then hoisted her up into his lap. What's next, then? I've had enough of this hunter talk. Suana, clever enough to know when she'd been beat, mumbled sadly. The witch doctors. They've responded to your summons, come to give you news of your friend. You little monsters use that word too readily. The monk is a companion, talented and useful, but the one true king of men's friendship is not one with tricks and lies. You would do well to remember that. Maul clapped loudly with his massive, calloused hands. Let the witch doctors in. One of the witch doctors, the eldest of their number, strode alone into the longhouse. The halfling's new king was clearly of divine origin. He had endured the flame of the old god and come out unscathed. He was the Avatar, and the witch doctors knew better than to defy him. But their piety was split between that earthly deity upon his granite throne and the power of causality and balance, a power that was older and stronger than any god, any idea, or any force in the sundered worlds, save one. Maul couldn't put his finger on why, but the witch doctor, though he was scarcely 3 feet tall, frightened him. Whether it was the witch doctor's insouciant demeanor, his grim appearance, or something else entirely, Maul couldn't tell. But where fear is left to fester, nothing good can grow. So Maul bellowed out. Were you successful? Is it done? Is he back to normal? I would see him now. The witch doctor, unfazed by Maul's royal anger, kept walking forward, proudly. Oh, we were extremely successful, extraordinarily successful. The witch doctor chuckled lightly. But the monk is far from normal, and he is far from ready to be seen. Maul scowled, his brows knitting in irritation. What do you mean? Speak plainly. In response, the witch doctor's eyes flashed from beneath the human skull he wore as a mask. He smiled a toothy grin, the same grin that all savage halflings know, the one that expertly shows off the points of their filed teeth. You know as little of our magic as you do of ruling. Maul began to stand up from his throne. How dare you? Oh, I dare very well, my king. I dare to give you exactly what you asked for, whether you want it or not? The witch doctor turned slowly, chuckling as he began to walk back to the door of the longhouse. The monk needs more time. More time to adjust. As the witch doctor walked through the door, he was joined by those of his number who had accompanied him to their god king's longhouse. But Maul, the stone god's avatar, was not content to wait through their delays. More time. More time! I told you to work your magics, to fix his legs. How much more time could you possibly need? Though Maul marshaled all of his innate royal authority, though he spoke in the commanding voice that only those of his line could harness, the witch doctors gave him no answer except laughter. Tinny, high-pitched laughter that Maul heard often in the halfling village, but underneath it, something else, something different, a deeper but more frantic laughter that caused the hair on Maul's arms to stand up in protest. A laughter that started in the witch doctor's tents, then reverberated throughout the village. The same laughter that had haunted the darkness every night since Maul had commanded the witch doctors to heal his companion. The witch doctor noticed Maul's unease, took note of his discomfort, then silenced the laughter of his fellow witch doctors. But he could do nothing to stem the rising tide of the haunting cackle echoing throughout the village. Being healed by our magics is an ordeal, and like any ordeal, the monk has emerged, changed. He needs more time to adjust. The witch doctor grinned, once again flashing his filed teeth at Maul. And you would do well with more time to prepare. It had been a mere 4 hours. 4 hours of stolen sleep while that soul-dim sun rushed across the sky, not emitting enough heat to warm the cold, ancient stones of the tower or the stones scattered across the surrounding tundra, not emitting enough light to illuminate the shadowy darkness that filled the inside of the tower, or even to cut through the perpetual gloom that hung over that barren wasteland. But though that sun was dim, cold, and dull, it had been bright enough to send the trolls scurrying back to their caves. The sun wasn't much to speak of, but it was all that she had, the only salvation that could ever come after an exhausting, frantic 20-hour stint of defending her tower, the sole source of light, decency, civilization, and knowledge in that dying realm. In the old days, the sun had been stronger, or at least that's what they had told her. Strong enough to turn those foul, disgusting trolls into granite, a rock as dense, senseless, and unyielding as they were. But that time was long ago, if it ever really existed, and the sun no longer held that power over the swarming hordes of trolls that grew in number each and every day. The sun could no longer turn the trolls to stone, but that didn't mean the beasts enjoyed its gentle caress. No, to the trolls, the sun was everything they hated and feared. It brought light, making knowledge possible, and it banished the darkness, the heavy cloud of ignorance that fogged the minds of the trolls. Though it was dim and cold, the rays, even the meager light that made it into the tower, they made the troll's skin ache. So when the sun began to emerge, when it announced itself weakly over the horizon, the trolls did as they had always done. They rushed back to the only place that could protect them, their deep, labyrinthine caves, so deep, so dark and complex that the trolls, in their perpetual dazed stupor, could only guess where they walked, stumbled, fell, and slept in the darkness. As soon as the trolls began their retreat, she threw herself on the simple mats she used as a bed. She didn't make sure that all the trolls had left. She didn't bother extinguishing the fire or even throwing on more wood. She had only 4 hours, 4 meager hours for a futile attempt to replenish herself, leaving no time to do anything but collapse in an exhausted heap, falling deep, deep into slumber. Too soon afterward, her sleeping body felt the room grow cold and dark. Her candles had gone out, the fires had shrunk to softly glowing coals, and most crucially, that dim, useless sun was already moving to hide beyond the horizon. She rolled off her mats as she had done countless times before, and she began the same daily preparations she had always done and that she would always do until the inevitable occurred, and she could do them no longer. Though she had performed all the motions before, performed them countless times, this time there was something different. It was more work than normal to crawl out of bed, to force the sleep from her eyes, even to rush around the room lighting the candles, bringing light where there had been only darkness. Most troubling, however, was her right arm. It felt heavy, wooden, leaden even, and moving it was a chore, necessitating far more effort, far more strength of will than it normally required, than it should require. She swung it back and forth. She held it by the now growing fire. She even tried to beat it into wakefulness with her other hand. But to no avail. Her heart began to beat faster. Sweat beaded on her brow despite the growing cold, and she began to panic. The day would eventually come. She knew it would. One way or another, the day would come. Was it that day? Was it that day already? Had it come so quickly? Is this how it would end? She felt dizzy, as if the tower was spinning around her. She put her left hand to her head and turned, searching for something on which to steady herself. But when she did, something else came into her vision. The northern window, and outside of it, dotting the landscape, growing in number by the second, those glowing green eyes blinking into existence from within their dark, dank, foul, hidden caves. Her arm had felt heavy, motionless, dull, and as useless as that realm's deficient sun, felt as if it were encased in stone. But as she looked upon the troll hordes, as she thought upon their nescient lust for destruction, as she mused on their ignorant desire to shatter the world into rubble, her arm began to lighten. A smile grew on her face. A hateful, sardonic smile crept across her visage as she thought about the fire she would cast down on the trolls, on their children, on their children's children, on anyone who dared march against the tower. Her tower. Her eyes brightened as she imagined the hell that she would rain down upon them. And she went to work. If you're enjoying SKALD, please leave a good review on iTunes. It's free, easy, and it helps me out a ton. Plus, if you leave a good one, I'll read it on the show. Bro Mike 666 says, spellbinding. I had to remember to breathe. There are currently 2 ways that I'm trying to monetize this thing so that I can keep it going. Forever, hopefully. The first is Patreon, an awesome, secure, easy-to-use service that allows you to donate small, monthly dollar amounts to support the things you love. Things like SKALD. $1 per month works out to about $0.25 per 30-minute episode. That, my fine feathered friends, is value. Patreon.com/SKALD. If Patreon ain't your speed, or you're looking for an additional way to support your favorite podcast, pick up the SKALD Volume 1 ebook for only $2.99, exclusively on Amazon. It collects the prose versions of SKALD's first 16 episodes, and the reviews so far have been excellent. Find a link down below in the description. I am all over the internet. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr, they're all Aubrey Sitterson. Or just head over to aubreysitterson.com, where I have links to everything, including SKALD, the SKALD ebook, my comics writing work, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, bio, contact information, and more. This week's recommendation is Berlin. Not the city, the newest album from Cadaver, spelled with a K, naturally. Despite their grim-sounding name, Cadaver is a really groovy, heavy rock band. No screaming or death metal voices. Berlin pushes things in an even catchier, hookier direction than their previous work, and it is awesome. The first single, and arguably the best track, is Last Living Dinosaur. And if you dig SKALD, I think it's going to be right up your alley. The album is available on Spotify and iTunes, or you can find that first single on YouTube. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.